Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babiar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker.
My guest today is Adam Kennard. Adam lives in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area and has been serving diligently for a while now with a ministry called Urban Impact. Adam, my friend, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. Now, Adam, you really are the one who caused this podcast because you grabbed me at a Support Raising Solutions boot camp that was in your area to tell me about what happened a while back when you went to a boot camp and then jumped into raising your support. Let me ask you, first of all, when did you go to a support raising boot camp training?
It was November of 2015. Okay.
All right. So at the time we're recording this, it's towards the end of November of 2019. Mm-hmm. And although I have a feeling that your story is, first of all, it's not unique. I've heard from other people like you who have a similar story, but also it's probably going to be a bit timeless. I mean, world events and things can always change, but the reality is somebody listening to this maybe a year or two down the road, it's not like this doesn't work anymore because a lot of the principles that you put into place and the things that you did, yeah, they're based off biblical truth. They weren't based off of where you're at in the country or anything like that, right?
Yeah, very true.
Now, I'm just going to interview you and get some basic building blocks here because I'm sure the listeners want to know more about you. First of all, are you from Pennsylvania originally?
No. So I was born in Louisiana and grew up in Texas, and I made my way to Pittsburgh for graduate school and had no plan on staying in Pittsburgh. Was just going to be here for a 3-year stint and then move on.
Okay. And so how long have you lived in the Pittsburgh area now?
Now it's going over 7 years.
Okay, great. So when you started working with Urban Impact, how was it presented to you that you needed to raise support? Like take us back, take the listener back. What was your heart and mind? Was that something you were like, okay, great? Or were you completely terrified and you almost quit? Like what was your head like? What was your heart like? Tell us about all that.
Yeah. So, let me back up just a little bit. In February of 2015 is when the call to ministry started. I was in my semester of graduation from graduate school. I was doing the whole what am I going to do with my life question type thing that all students face at some point. Sure. And over the next 7 months, I like to call it as my arduous discernment phase that I went through to finally, that the Lord was finally like, this is where I want you to be. So I sat in front of my now boss in August of 2015, and I was like, I got nothing. Like I have followed the Lord for 8 months or 8 months now. And this is where he has landed me in front of you. I feel very strongly that this is where he is. And we had a big, long conversation. She said, great. We have no open positions. So if this is going to work, like I've got to talk to all of my bosses and see if this will work. And then she handed me a book called The God Ask and said, if this works, you're going to have to do this. Oh. And I said, because before that, just to pause on my personal story, Urban Impact had been a phase support raising organization to where like they gave you a year. In the first 3 months, it was 100% them, 0% you. And the next 3 months was like a 70-30, and then it became 50-50. And so you had a gradation to get your support. And I was one of the first support fully front loaded. And she was like, so she just said, this book has been highly suggested to us from a very respectable associate of Urban Impact. You're going to need to read this book and do this. And I had it loosely in my head that support raising was going to be in this, but it wasn't really the front runner of anything. At this point, having followed the Lord through trying to find a job, and then I got really good at this email that said, "Thank you so much for your time, but I'm pursuing something else." And I didn't really have anything else. I was just following the Lord in that. So if support raising was it, then that was going to be it, because it was at the point to where I was like, it seems like this is the destination, and this is just something that comes with the destination, and I'll figure it out. So,
okay.
And then, yeah.
So let me ask you, so they hand you this book, which, the God Ask is not the biggest book in the world. But it's not a pamphlet either. I mean, it's really something that as you dig into it, it gets down to kind of the crust rather quickly and starts messing with your heart and your mind and all that kind of stuff. So
quickly.
She gives you this book, and what happens? Does it sit on the shelf, or do you dig in, or do you pretend you don't have it? Like, what's your reaction?
So I go home, and I'm living with some folks at that point because my apartment lease from grad school was up. And these folks were friends of mine that I had actually made at Urban Impact. So I'd gotten connected to Urban Impact a few years before, and met some people. And I was living with a colleague of mine and his wife at the time. And I just go home that night and feel very adamant that this is where I'm supposed to be. So I'm like, okay, I'll just start reading this thing. And I get hooked. And I just start like chugging through this book. And then the next thing I know, I start like chugging through the Bible studies and like all of the, like scriptural stuff that it has, like all the stuff that you asked to do for boot camp, like all that Bible study. And I just start going after it. And I guess there was a lot of anticipation that had been built up over those 7 months. So like when it finally seemed like I had hit something, like I was just excited.
So it sounds like God was already preparing your heart and your mind. Like you were ready in some ways, even though it wasn't what you'd been planning on. All of a sudden it was like this. I've been waiting for the Lord. I've been listening, and He's put something in front of me. Praise Jesus. Oh wait, I have to raise money.
Actually, that's a perfect nutshell. Like it's like, oh my God, okay, this is what I gotta do this too. Then bring it on. Let's get this done.
Yeah.
So,
okay. All right. So let's fast forward a little bit. You accept the position, you're ready to move forward, and then what?
So so I accept the position. I finally officially get hired in October. Like they finally give me the green light after, And then I had been reading the book, been chugging through, name storming, following. I mean, I will just say this right now to all of the listeners. One of the things that God has gifted me with is like discipline and the desire to follow a plan. So you put a plan in front of me that, especially one that I'm excited about and can go after, like that's in the God Ask. And like, I just started walking it. And you said like, or the book said like, do all these Bible studies. So I spent probably a month chugging through all that stuff because it is dense.
Yes, so it is.
If you really want to try to dig through and not cram, the week before your class to get the discount, like it is super dense. So I just like started chugging through. So that way, when I hit the green light official in October, like I was ready to go, and we had already had plans. I went to her and I said, "Hey, they have a class that I can go to. Can I go to it?"
Okay.
And she and Urban Impact actually paid for me to go to the class.
Okay. Where did you travel for that, by the way? I'm curious.
Atlanta.
Okay. All right. So this is kind of the lead up, and for the listener, I will say this: it's very common to have similar stories, not exact, because, Adam, your story is your story, but similar stories where in some way, shape, or form, whether somebody's like, yeah, I got to learn this because I got to do this, or they're like, okay, I've been raising support for years and I'm terrible at it. I need to get trained, or I'm not sure if I can do this. The book was good, but it also intimidates me. I'm just going to go and check out the boot camp. I need to hear some of this, not just read this. I need to talk to people that have put this into practice, not just some theoretical guy named Steve Shadrack who lives in Arkansas somewhere. Like
right.
People come to the boot camp differently, and yet it is an even playing field from the standpoint of you had the opportunity to read a book and, more importantly, do some Bible study before you ever showed up, correct?
Yes. And I loved specifically the boot camp. One of the amazing things to me is it was kind of an even playing field, and was also just the diversity of where people were going. I mean, people were going all over the world, and there's a couple that I'll never forget. They were with the IMDb for like 30 years, somewhere in South America. And because of some troubles with the IMDb had a few years ago, they were called off the mission field, but felt very strongly that they should go back and basically finish their lives there because they had spent so much time there already. And this was the first time that they were support raising in over 30 years of like missions that they had been on the field. And I just remember them, just their story was really powerful. And then just some of like what they had been talking about and how boot camp like impacted them sometime. And like, I just remember at one point there was towards the end of boot camp, we had like a share, like, what have you learned? What has impacted you moment? And they just kind of shared a few things, and their story just inspired me to just be like, wow, that's just really cool. And like you said, like meeting people that have been on the field for years and have struggled with support raising, other people that were brand new, and all kinds of people, and people everywhere in between, and like kind of figuring this out, like, is this going to be a thing for me? All of that was just a really powerful moment, let alone all the curriculum that we went over and just everything that y'all taught. But just being in that environment for those, 2 days was incredibly encouraging. And really, I think just one of the things that really helped me keep moving forward and just give me an extra boost of energy to, just keep going.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so this is kind of the lead up, because here's the question I get on occasion. And to be honest, I don't mean to be trite or dismissive of it, but every now and then someone says something along the lines of, hey, do people really get fully funded in 100 days? Like, that doesn't really happen, does it? And I'm always like, yeah, I have people tell me all the time they got fully funded in 100 days. Yeah. So on one hand, I would say, is it possible? Absolutely. It happens frequently. Does that happen for everybody? Is this a prescription, a guarantee that you will get fully funded in 100 days? No. Yeah. In fact, I'm someone that took a little bit longer. Right as we moved into raising support, multiple things happened that were difficult. The housing market crashed. We found out my wife had a brain tumor. I mean, we had some crazy stuff happen to us. Did I get fully funded? Yes. Did I do it in 100 days? No, for really good reason.
Yeah.
I had to pause and do a few different things for a while. And people have their other reasons, but I will say this. I do see some consistency. I do see something that tends to happen in people who raise full support. And what little I know from your story, Adam, they're true. They're true for you. And so I want to dig into that with you, because you went to the boot camp, and that didn't raise the support for you. That was just kind of the baseline training for the real training you were about to do in trying to raise your support, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So let's jump into some of these stats. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so first of all, when did you do this? Because I've heard people say, oh, well, you know, this time of year is bad, this time of year is bad, this time of year is good. Yeah. And I always say, you know what? What's the time of year that's good is the time that God puts in front of you. I've had people argue, don't do it at the end of the year. People are so busy with the holidays. But when did you raise your support, Adam?
I raised my support from November 1st to January 15th, plowed right through the holidays.
Wow. So, okay. Now you live in Pittsburgh.
Correct.
So I'm sure you did some travel, but let me ask you, how many appointments, and you didn't give me all these stats, so I'm definitely putting you on the spot. How many appointments did you think you had around the greater Pennsylvania area?
Probably like 20 to 30 in the Pittsburgh area. Probably about 20 or 30 in there.
Okay. And will you confirm or deny the someone tried to tell me from Pennsylvania once, they said, you know, people in this area country, they don't give. People in the Northeast will never give to missions things with Christ. Would you confirm or deny that statement?
I would deny that statement wholeheartedly. So.
Okay. All right. Now, let's get into some of the other stats. So you said you had about 30 appointments in the general Pittsburgh area, but I know you mentioned some other places that you lived. So did you do some traveling? If so, about how many miles did you drive? How many different U.S. states did you go through or spend time in?
Yeah. So like I said earlier, I was born in Louisiana, grew up in Texas. I had friends in New York City, so I took a small support trip from Pittsburgh to New York City and hit a few people along the way there. And then that was at the beginning of November. And then right after, I waited a couple weeks, kept doing phone calls, and then about somewhere around the 5th or 6th of December, I got in the car from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and started the road trip and went to Virginia, all the way down to Tennessee, all the way out to Texas, somewhere around 5,000 miles. Made it to my parents' house in Mississippi for Christmas. And so I think somewhere around 9 total states that I went through. And even with the road trip, I averaged like 2, at least even days of travel, like 2 people a day. And then, so I was on the road maybe like 18 days or something like that. Somewhere I got to my parents' house like the 23rd of Christmas of December. Yep.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So during those 2 weeks of like your main road trip, you would have anywhere from 3 to 5 appointments a day. Some days might be 2, some days might be more. But but you were in the car, or you were probably having coffee or eating dinner, or eating dinner again, Yes. Right. But that's a nice little aside. Tell us about the risks of eating when you're raising support.
Yes. The hardest thing, I had a couple appointments. I grew up in Texas, and that's where I spent majority of my life. So I spent a lot of time there in Texas. And in one city where I'd grown up, I ended up having more than one day where I would have a 5 o'clock dinner and then a 7:30 dinner. And it got really hard, like to just sit there and, because, I got really good at eating like a salad. I was like, you have to, because if you eat a full meal, you will die by like 9 o'clock. You will just, So,
your metabolism can't keep up when you keep putting food in, can it?
So I did what had to be done, but there's small things like that. I'm like, I just, that just kind of random situations you run into. So,
yeah. By the way, I have heard, Adam, and I mentioned this probably on other podcasts, but I have heard people that actually lost weight considerably while they were raising support, not because they didn't want to eat, but because they brought discipline into their life in such a way that it affected their food choices, and they started paying attention because they had just they hadn't had a whole lot of discipline for like health and stuff like that. But I've also heard of other people, and I think I'm one of them, that had to, start realizing my pants are tight and they've never been tight before. Maybe I shouldn't eat lunch twice today.
Well, when I was there was a new restaurant in Mississippi that when I got there to do support raising, I had gone, one of the appointments was like, hey, we can go here. And I was like, great. And then the next time someone was like, where would you go? I was like, hey, there's a new place downtown. Do you want to go there? And then the next day I ended up eating there like 3 or 4 times in a row because I was just like,
they'll recognize you at that point,
right? Especially when it's new and, you show up. But I was just trying different things on the menu. I loved it. It was great. Yep, you got to.
Okay. You gotta be careful, folks. You gotta be careful, folks. But one of the things I want to point out here, part of you being fully funded, and it is the fact that, if we reverse engineer that, you organized your life and your time and your calendar in such a way that you weren't just getting 2 or 3 appointments a week. You were getting 2 or 3 appointments a day. And that really gave you momentum.
Yes. I mean, that was the only way to do it. And almost such a large portion of my support did not come from the Pittsburgh area. So it pushes me to be like, I can only be in Texas for like 3 or 4 days. Like I don't, be away from my support base, laundry and all that kind of stuff for so many days. Right. So it's like, you got to cram it in while you're there. And I was there probably for like 6 days. And I mean, averaged at least 3 appointments a day. And then I was on the phone with people, like if people had to cancel, talking to them. So it just became
I bet you're on the phone a lot while you were driving too.
Yes,
aren't you?
and like I promote headphones while driving or hands-free devices. But yes,
and all the charger cords you can muster.
Yes, yeah. I actually got really comfortable. I'm not a coffee drinker, unfortunately, but I needed a place to sit and stay and like catch up on who has answered the phone when I'm meeting with people. And I found McDonald's is really great. I would just go into the back of a McDonald's and take a booth and sit there for a good hour, make phone calls, update my like spreadsheet on who had said what and where people were and all that kind of stuff. And never bought a thing, but no one in like 6 states of sitting at like a dozen McDonald's, no one ever bothered me. So if you need a place to stay and you're on a road trip, McDonald's are literally everywhere.
Yeah, they are. And I will say too, you having a good set of headphones that have noise canceling can really help in those situations. Also, buy a cup of coffee or something if you can, if that's going to help you. For some people, that's going to help you stay warm, or it's going to put some caffeine in your body, or maybe you're just at a mom and pop shop and you're going to flush their toilet, so you want to at least buy a cup of coffee. It doesn't mean you always have to. You don't always have to. But I will warn you though, Adam, I had a similar, not exact same situation, but years ago, I went to Michigan Theological Seminary. Now it's Moody Bible, East Campus. It's in Detroit area. It's in Plymouth, Michigan. But anyway, when I was there, it was right when we had our first baby, and I was working as a youth pastor, and so I couldn't get work done at the church for seminary because I was also going to seminary full time. But then I couldn't. I was at the church, I was doing church stuff. When I was at home, I was trying to do my seminary, and I finally went, I can't get anything done. I can't get my homework done. There's stuff I have to do. And so I was not a coffee drinker, but I started hanging out in a local coffee shop. And it was a great way of just being very focused, and I would get all of my seminary work done in the coffee shop. However, I did start drinking coffee, and I have one in my hand right now. So be careful. Be careful. You can accidentally introduce that to your diet and somehow start liking it. So when people say, "Do you drink coffee?" I say, "Not until seminary, man. Seminary made me drink coffee." So,
if you love to read, we have an entire blog article archive on support raising, from biblical encouragement to practical tips to stories and personal experiences. Meanwhile, there's different articles that are more along the lines of shaping culture, elevating training, and building infrastructure so that you can multiply your coaching within your missions organization. Either way, you might want to go check out some of our articles at supportraisingsolutions.org/blog.
Anyway, all right, so that's a little bit of a side. So get back to some of your stats here. So you did the bulk of your road trip, sounds like, in December. You started raising support in November, so you were, again, I'm reverse engineering this.
Yep.
You made most of your initial phone calls probably at the end of October, right, to set up those appointments. Yep. And then, of course, you had the boot camp right around that same time, and then you averaged 3 to 5 appointments every day. Now, let me ask you this. Did you take a day off every week?
I did not. And looking back, that was kind of a mistake because one of the things that happened is, and I'm very thankful for this, and I thank the Lord for this, is I never got tired of telling the story and what I will be doing at Urban Impact, but I most definitely got tired of talking. And just communing with people. And the hard thing was really emotionally is a lot of my appointments were not 45 minutes. I mean, they were 45 minutes to 2 hours because
you're catching up with old friends when you're on the road trip, right?
Exactly. So you spend the first 45 minutes, you talk about Urban Impact, you talk about support, and then like you close that chapter and you wrap that all up. And then it's like, how's mom? How are the kids? Like, how's this? What's going on here? What was grad school like? And then we'd sit there and talk for another hour, which is amazing. But it can just be incredibly draining when you're having 3 to 5 appointments a day. That's, 5 to 8 hours of conversation a day. And so, I did not do that. I didn't consciously do it, but I was kind of like, oh, I'll have some time to I was like, well, I won't talk to, in the car or whatever, but So I did not do that.
So now I'm not coming down on you. It's lesson learned. But I will say that, for our listeners, hey, God made you for work, but he also made you for rest.
Amen.
Plan as well as possible to take a full day off every week.
Correct.
And do something that's going to fill your cup. If you're an introvert, you probably need to not talk to anybody. Maybe you need to be in a cabin in the woods.
Very true.
If you're an extrovert, maybe you need to be around people, but people you don't know, people that you don't need to talk to. I don't know. Obviously, we want people to, still attend a weekly worship service and stuff like that. But the reality is, when you're going to church while you're raising support, some of your best opportunity to bump and run and ask somebody for an appointment is there. It's at church. And so really Sunday might need to be a work day for you. And yet, wow, don't give up on having a day of Sabbath and rest and connection with the Lord. It's even good to recreate, do something fun, maybe go out and play Frisbee golf or play soccer, or I like to play basketball or go scuba diving. Those are things I like to do. It doesn't really matter, but don't make that day about activity alone. Make it about, communing with the Lord, getting rest, maybe taking a nap. Yes, in the midst of the season of raising support, even then, I believe God has designed us to have a day of rest, and it's modeled even back to creation. So I'll get off my little pedestal there, and Adam, I hope I wasn't picking on you, but it sounds like you didn't do that, and you're wishing you would have.
100%, and I totally vouch. I support your soapbox 100% because I just
come on up here with me, sir.
Because it was crazy. I didn't even really take I didn't even take Christmas. I did and I didn't. I showed up at my parents' house in Mississippi on the 23rd, 24th, 25th, and 26th. I was with my family, but I'm one of the cooks in the family. So on the 24th, I went over to my aunt's house and was helping cook. The 25th we do our meal on the eve on the 24th. So that's a big day. 25th was slower, and 26th was kind of slow, but it's still, by the 26th, I was starting to make phone calls for like the next phase of the trip and such, and connecting with people, or had lunch that day probably. So like even so I was just like, maybe like I'm taking a step up on your soapbox and just be like, yes, please, people, just don't burn yourself out before you get to the mission field. Like that will be a challenge in and of itself.
Adam, usually though, I will say our problem, and when I say I mean our brothers and sisters in Christ that God has called the Great Commission vision. Usually our problem is not heart, it's not passion, it's not vision. It's frequently we don't have a proper work ethic, and that includes rest. That definitely we need to have that day of rest, but also we don't have a proper work ethic of how many meetings we can have. In fact, just this last week, I had a friend of mine. It's someone I've known loosely. We're not super close, but we have many similar friends, and God has called him into a season of needing to raise full support. And very respectfully, he began arguing with me that even though he's supposed to be raising support full time, and that really is his focus, his schedule's been cleared otherwise, that he really can't have more than 6 meetings a week. And I had to bite my tongue and say, wait a minute. Wait a minute. So would you respectfully, because I did talk with him, and I wouldn't call him out. He's a super awesome dude. But what would you tell someone that says, yeah, I want to be fully funded in 100 days and I'm just going to have 6 appointments a week? What would you say to them? I
would strongly encourage them to reconsider that, and also just strongly encourage them to, just what are you going to do for the rest of your hours of the day? I mean, if you had one coffee in the morning before someone went to work, that's 45 minutes. So you're going to spend the next on an American 8-hour day, 7 hours, like tweaking your newsletter. Like, I don't know. I mean, one that practically, but I would just like strongly encourage you to like reconsider that. Yep, there you go. I just strongly encourage you to not consider that, because it's like your weeks will go by so fast, because there'll be days and weeks that it seems like you would have had everyone will line up, and then all of a sudden everyone will cancel, and and then you're back kind of at the drawing board on that day. But you've just got to plow forward if you really want to make that 100-day, or just even maybe even just the ASAP. Like if you just want to make it as soon as possible, then it's more than one a day.
Yes. And so in your case, you were averaging, so you said 3 to 5 appointments a day. So it would be fair to say that you had about 15 appointments a week. Is that right?
I would say so. Yes.
Okay. And just so the listeners know too, again, we can't be completely prescriptive and tell you what exactly is going to go and how it's going to go and all that kind of stuff. But 10 appointments a week really is within range for most people, especially if you're full-time. It really is. If you're full-time, if that's what you're doing, if that's your full focus. If you're part-time, then 5 or 6. If you're full-time and you want to get it done quickly, then you can have 15. And I do hear from people that get fully funded in 100 days or less. And I got to tell you, usually those aren't people that are doing 10 a week. They're doing a higher number, sometimes 15, sometimes 17 or 18. I've talked to a few people, they had 20 appointments a week, and I think they must be gifted in ways that I'm not, because I think I would have just gone crazy. That would have been too much for me. But they were also very administrative, by the way. So that's the other thing, is that there were people that had like administrative gifts that I lack. So we can't be super prescriptive, and yet for those that go, wow, 100 days, people can't really raise full funding in 100 days. Can they? The answer is yes, they can. But that's going to be different. We can't promise that for everybody. And one other thing we haven't mentioned here, Adam, is are you married?
I am now. I wasn't then.
Okay, but you weren't at the time.
Correct.
Okay, so you weren't married. You didn't have kids. So you had a lot more flexibility. And not that, I'm not going to ask you to get into your budget, because no matter what you would say, some people would think that was too much or not enough. So we're not going to get into that. But I'm certain that your needs as you began to raise support were significantly different from what mine were. At the time that I began to raise support, I already had four kids and a mortgage. So we were in different seasons of life, and I don't know that I could have raised full support in 100 days. But if we hadn't had some of the major curveballs we did, and I had access to some of the training and coaching and things like that, like what you have, 120 maybe, 130 maybe, but it could have happened. It definitely could have happened, but it would have taken a different focus, and certainly 10, 15 appointments a week, not 3 or 4. By the way, Adam, just so you know, that was another one of the reasons, and I'm not saying my other things that happened in life weren't real that were causing issues, but one of the reasons it took me so long was because, I was only getting a couple, maybe 3 appointments a week. And that's kind of like toddling as compared to running. That's a completely different transportation. So,
and you mentioned,
anyway.
I'll just say,
brother, please go ahead. Go ahead.
And I did have the benefit of being able to do it full time. And that is one of the things that I know, that can really change that is like, if you're having to work a part-time job, if you're still full-time and sport raising in the evenings, like trying to get to the mission field or however your situation, like give yourself grace for that, because I was able to raise full-time, and things. So like there was a lot of, like blessing that I had and some favor that the Lord like just lined up in my life to be able to have that time and the finances to go and like go on this road trip for the weeks and meet with all these people and all of that. So, And
that's a great, gracious point. That being said, even if somebody, doesn't have those same circumstances, sometimes they might need to reevaluate how can they create some of those circumstances? How can they make windows in their time? So, by the way, that's a good place to plug training. And so we know support raising solutions boot camps they're world-class support raising training. It's not the only training out there. Some other organizations will offer it internally. Yeah, go through that. That's great. There are some other things out there, but if you've never had training, even if you're pretty confident that you can do this and you've raised a little bit of support before and all that good stuff, if you've never had actual good training, it's key. It's key, because I know that one of the things that happens in a good training on support raising is they look at your time, they look at your calendar, and you're challenged to reconsider all the different things that you're a part of that you might need to put on pause for a season. So, well, Adam, my friend, I think that there's a lot of good information and stats you brought to this. So I'm looking at one of the things you sent me. It says that you were 100% pledged and over 90% funded by February 1st. So you started November 1st. You did most of your support raising between November 1st and January 15th. So it sounds like those following couple of weeks, you're making follow-up phone calls and reconnecting people. So 100% pledged, 90% funded by February 1st. And then it just took a few more weeks to bring in that last 10%. Is that accurate?
That is 100% accurate. Okay. And I will just say this. I thought y'all were a little crazy that if someone agrees on the spot and says yes to the amounts you ask for, to whip out your phone and be like, hey, will you type that in right now? But all I can tell you, listener, is do it, because making follow-up phone calls to remind people to get their credit card information into the system is laborious to the nth degree. And it just is crazy. And most people are so gracious that they're like, oh, thank you so much for reminding me. Like, they're glad you called, but just like connecting with them is so challenging.
Yes, it is.
And then just one small little nugget, at least for me, if you can get people to do the bank account thing, it is so much more stable than a credit card. This is and you don't have to do the like, oh, my credit card got like
expired on me, right?
It expired or it had interesting activity, so we canceled it. And then like they're like, oh, dang, like reconnecting. Bank accounts are so much more stable if you can do that with people. That's just,
So true.
There's some small nuggets that of just, that's what you do once a week, trying to keep up with people.
Yeah. Good word. Well, brother, I think we're going to wrap up this episode. That was a great final word. And so all this to say is raising full funds, being spiritually healthy, vision driven, fully funded, is that actually possible in 100 days? So Adam, in your case, you can say a very clear yes. Doesn't mean there's not little extra mop up duties and things like that. Like, it takes some time, but you are evidence that it is possible. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast today to share your testimony. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And it was great to be here.
Great. God bless.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.